Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces in this room, and thank you for joining us. For an important discussion on international security, impact of environment.
I want to work on the world in front of people,
Okay, but then okay, I will.
No, she said open
and of course, the Wildlife Conservation Society, which I represent. I've mentioned that. I'd also like to acknowledge the online participants. Following the event remotely, we had about 100 registered participants from different states, international organizations, and civil society. We are grateful for your attendance as well. This is a discussion that is particularly important for the Wildlife Conservation Society, which I represent. We are particularly eager to host a conversation on this subject for two reasons.
Presentation.
There's a few issues with the slides, but we're going to be able to get those working soon. The first reason as to why we are so interested in this topic and we believe it's important is that when we talk about crimes that affect the environment, often we place the attention on that last presentation environment. When in reality, as we've learned today, crimes that affect the environment affect so much more. From national and international security to economies and financial systems, health, the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, and ultimately the very ecosystems human life depends on. The second reason why WCS was so eager to host this event today has to do with the very work that we do across the world with our partners from government, civil society, and communities. And if I check whether science works today or not. Okay, can I? Perfect, thank you so much. We work across nearly 60 countries, and we do so by supporting governments, indigenous peoples, and local communities to develop management plans for protected areas, and even before so, establish protected areas. Since our foundation, we have helped establish over 430 protected areas across the world. And much of our work takes place in some of the world's most remote terrestrial areas, places that are often viewed primarily through of course, incredibly important, but also have profound national security implications. Protected areas are not only essential for biodiversity and sustainable development, but when effectively managed, they also serve as barriers against organized crime. At the same time, unfortunately, when protected areas are under-resourced, poorly governed, or abandoned altogether, they can become attractive, operative environments for criminal networks. These landscapes and seascapes contain valuable resources, natural resources from timber, minerals, fish, wildlife, and other commodities. Those can be exploited as sources of revenue for organized criminal groups. Remote areas can also provide logistical advantages for criminal actors. They can become safe havens beyond effective state control. They can serve as smuggling routes across borders, lending sites, transport corridors, and storage locations. So what begins as illegal extraction of natural resources does not remain an environmental crime, does not remain an environmental issue. Across Latin America, Africa, Asia, we increasingly see environmental crimes converging with other forms of transnational organized crime, and we will hear talk about that in a moment, including drug trafficking, money laundering, corruption, human trafficking, firearms trafficking. And environmental crime is not only occurring alongside organized crime, it's increasingly part of organized crime. Encouraging news, if there is any, and if we're all here because we believe that there's still a lot of work to be done, is that investments in tackling environmental crime and strengthening protected area management can generate benefits beyond nature conservation outcomes. So So strengthening protected area management, supporting enforcement agencies, improving cross-border cooperation, disrupting illicit financial flows can simultaneously protect nature, strengthen governance, and enhance security. Today's discussion, therefore, is not simply about wildlife or forests or minerals. It's about understanding environmental crime as a national and international security issue. So with that being said, allow me to introduce our wonderful panel. I will say I'm particularly excited about having an all-female panel talking about national security. That is something that I'm thrilled to be able to say today. And from my left, we have Vaughan, head of nature security. I keep saying national security. Head of nature security, international biodiversity and climate for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs from the UK government. One of our generous co-hosts, Cathy Haenlein, Director of Organized Crime and Policing Studies at the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, which you all know well, and Simone, Haysom, Director of Environmental Crime and Head of EcoSolve at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. After our wonderful panel is done with their presentations, we would love to take some questions. I know it's late and I know it's Tuesday and it feels like we've all been in this building for about 50 days at this point. But we're grateful for your presence and your participation. So without further ado, Carol, once again, thank you to the UK government for your general contribution, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to join you today. So as I said, I'm Carol Vaughan. I'm Head of Nature Security at the UK's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Hopefully we'll have some slides, but if not, don't worry. Let's move into that slide. And I lead our policy-facing work on how biodiversity loss and ecosystem degradation can translate into risks for national security, economic and geopolitical stability, and wider resilience. So I know many in this room already well understand environmental crime, so I want to bring in nature security lens, which starts with a really simple proposition. Nature is not just scenery, species, or habitat. It is hidden infrastructure that helps to regulate food, water, energy, disease risk, and supply chains. And when that infrastructure weakens, those risks do not remain within the environment. They move across economies, borders, and security systems. IPBES, the independent global science policy body for biodiversity, has estimated that around 1 million species are threatened by extinction, many within decades, with extinction rates already tens to hundreds of times higher than average over the past 10 million years. Some scientists describe this as the possible early stages of a sixth mass extinction event. Now, whether we use that term or not, the security point is clear. We are profoundly altering the natural systems upon which our societies rely. And the relationship between ecosystem degradation and environmental crime is not one directional. Environmental crime accelerates ecosystem degradation. But ecosystem degradation also creates conditions for environmental crime to become more profitable, more organised, and harder to control. As resources become scarcer, values rise. As livelihoods come under increased pressure, people become more vulnerable to exploitation. So the nature security question is not just how does crime damage nature? It is also how does a degrading natural system change the operating environment for crime, exploitation, and instability? And that's the reinforcing cycle that I want to focus on today. The UK recently published, just in January of this year, its first national security assessment on global biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse. The purpose was not simply to generate another environmental report, it was to ask a very specific security question. And that is, how could ecosystem degradation overseas create cascading risks for UK national security? The assessment identified 6 ecosystems of strategic importance: the Amazon, the Congo Basin, the Himalayas, the coral reefs and mangroves of Southeast Asia, the boreal forests of Russia, and the boreal forests of Canada. Now, their diversity shows that this is not a niche or a localized issue. All of those ecosystems underpin critical planetary functions whose consequences would travel far beyond their borders. Nature-related security risks are inherently transnational. Environmental crime and ecosystem degradation do not respect political boundaries. They disrupt global supply chains, food markets, and migration flows that connect us all. So every country has a stake in addressing these risks together. But this must be grounded in respect for national sovereignty. The ecosystems identified in the UK assessment sit within sovereign states, with national rights and responsibility over the natural resources. The role of international cooperation is to support stewardship and capacity, not just to purely over-securitize nature in a way that displaces national ownership. But fragmented responses also create space for organised crime networks to adapt, relocate, and exploit governance gaps. The assessment shows ecosystem degradation is not a single ecological pressure. It's a cascade. Ecological pressure affecting human security, economic stability, governance, and ultimately international security. This isn't metaphorical, and it is not just future-facing. It's already shaping how societies absorb shocks, manage risks, and navigate fragilities. And critically, it doesn't stop at national borders. Ecosystem degradation is a risk multiplier. It rarely causes instability on its own, but it consistently intensifies pressures that our security systems already manage. Growth is not possible without stability, and stability increasingly depends on ecosystem resilience. And all of that matters for this discussion, because ecosystem degradation does not just create environmental harm. It changes incentives, vulnerabilities, and power dynamics. Ecosystem degradation and environmental crime are not separate issues. They are mutually reinforcing. So environmental crime accelerates ecosystem degradation. Illegal logging, illegal mining, wildlife trafficking, illegal fishing and waste crime, all of those things damage our natural systems upon which our societies depend. But the reverse is also true. Ecosystem degradation changes the operating environment for crime. And this is happening in a market that is already vast. Environmental crime is estimated at between 110 and 281 billion US dollars annually, growing by around 5 to 7% each year. Yet, less than 1% of illicit environmental financial flows are estimated to be recovered. This is not a marginal problem. It is a high-value, often low-risk criminal economy operating against a backdrop of increasing ecological pressure. Degradation changes the criminal operating environment by increasing the means. There's more access to high-value natural resources. It increases the motive as scarcity raises prices, and it increases the opportunity as livelihoods, governance, and enforcement capacity come under pressure. The UK assessment makes this point really clearly. It says that ecosystem collapse is highly likely to drive national security risks, and that serious and organised crime will seek to exploit and gain control over scarce resources. It also says that as more people are being pushed into poverty, there'll be further opportunities for exploitation, including trafficking and black markets. And those impacts will not be evenly felt. As ecological pressure increases, displacement, trafficking, and exploitation risks often rise too, with vulnerable groups, including women and girls, particularly exposed. So the nature security point is this. Environmental crime is not just a driver of ecological degradation, it's also a beneficiary of it.
I think we're right. And that loop is not theoretical. Thank you. We can already see it across different criminal markets. So take illegal mining. It's not just extraction. It can destroy forests, poison rivers, and contaminate water systems. But it can also generate illicit finance, fund armed and organized groups, and launder value into global markets. Or take fisheries crime. It is rarely just about fish. Supply chains and vessels can be used for trafficking, money laundering, movement of other illicit goods. Florida International University researchers have used genetic shark fin sample analysis to show CITES-listed species entering global markets despite international trade protections. From a nature security perspective, the point is the ecological loss can be hidden inside legal supply chains. And the damage on there is often already done before that risk is even detected. By the time a protected species appears in a legal market, the harm is no longer just an environmental or a conservation issue. It's evidence of a much wider systemic failing. Weak traceability, criminal adaptation, market demand, and ecosystem degradation all interacting as one. So the crime is not just the extraction, it's the network. And if we don't intervene early, those risks don't just grow, they cascade, they compound, and they become far more difficult and more costly for us to control. So what do we do with this? Well, we must treat ecosystems as strategic assets, not background conditions, and we have to be better at integrating them into existing tools that we use, risk assessments, preparedness planning, and scenario analysis. And it is vital that we bring ecological risk into organised crime analysis. One of the underlying messages in the UK assessment, and it's something that is reflected across all of the 7 key judgments, is that nature loss is no longer just an environmental issue. It is a strategic, systemic risk. And the earlier we understand and act upon it, the more options we give ourselves. By publishing the assessment, we have deliberately created space to engage with international partners and external experts on nature-related security risks. And the goal is not simply to describe risk, but it's to build a shared understanding of that and understand how early intervention can help reduce those risks. Our encouragement to fellow governments is simple. Conduct similar national security assessments on nature. Look at where ecosystem degradation could drive cascading risks across your food, water, health, energy and supply chains, and organised crime networks. The UK now has a dedicated nature security team, and we are very open and would welcome dialogue with any partners who would be interested in approaching this in a similar way. The national security cost of environmental crime is not only the damage done today, it's the instability created tomorrow. When degraded ecosystems, scarce resources, weakened livelihoods, and criminal activity begin reinforcing each other. So if nature loss is a shared risk, then protecting nature is shared security. And it's one of the smartest investments that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you again to the UK government for their leadership in this area. I took 2 particular notes. One is ecosystem degradation as a risk multiplier, and 2 is no growth without stability and no stability without functioning ecosystems. I think really good points for this forum and many others to take. I also wanted to address our online attendees. We are sorry for the initial technical issues, but I hear they have now been solved. So thank you for the support from our IT team. We now give the floor to Cathy Haenlein, Director of Organised Crime and Policing Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. I'm excited to have RUSI as a part of this panel because they've been a thought leader for a long time on the national security consequences of environmental crime. So thank you, Cathy, for being here today. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, just to apologize in advance, I am quite ill, so I've got a really sore throat. I might have to pause, but I'll do my best. So yeah, hi everyone, great to be here. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with RUSI, with the Royal United Services Institute. How well known we are always depends on where we are in the world. But anyway, for those who may not be familiar here, RUSI is the world's oldest and the UK's leading defence and security think tank. We were founded back in 1831 by the Duke of Wellington as a place where the different branches of the military could come together and discuss the issues of the day. RUSI has obviously evolved very significantly since then, and we cover a much wider range of security issues, including environmental crime and environmental security. But yeah, I always think it's quite a unique position to be talking about environmental crime, especially as an issue from an institution that is concerned primarily with defence and security. But in the case of today, that's entirely fitting. So I'm really pleased to bring that perspective to this discussion. So yeah, at RUSI, we've had a dedicated environmental crime program since about the mid-2010s. And since that point, we've really been tracking the security dimensions of environmental crime. And I think what is quite useful to do today, and what I'd like to do, is just to really pause for a minute and think about how the national security framing of environmental crime has evolved over time. Because I think that's really important to understand where we are now. You know, why do we look at environmental crime or crimes that affect the environment the way we do? I think it's important to look back at, you know, what has changed in terms of what security communities care about, what that means for responses to crimes that affect the environment, and why that matters now, you know, in the time we are now with heightened geopolitical competition, climate stress, the various challenges that we're facing. So I think understanding that background and how security institutions have, albeit imperfectly and unevenly, learned to understand environmental crime is important to see what we have to do now. What do we have to change going forward? So yeah, I've got some slides here. Basically, I think there have been a number of shifts, and many of us here in the room have lived through this and have, you know, helped to move the field forward through these different phases. The first phase, I think oh good, I've got a clicker, thanks. The first phase obviously, I think, is we've come from a very narrow conservation framing. So in the early years, you know, 80s, 90s, 2000s, environmental crime sat very largely outside of mainstream security thinking. It was viewed primarily as a conservation issue, something for environmental ministries, for park authorities, for conservation NGOs, to manage, rather than being an issue for enforcement or security institutions. And I remember myself, you know, the sort of reaction within RUSI when I tried to say we should have an environment program or an environmental crime program. There was a lot of skepticism. You know, why would a defense think tank want to be worrying about cuddly animals, was the response at the time. But I think we've established very clearly since then that this is a security issue that those sorts of institutions should care about. So yeah, the next phase of security perceptions, I think, came with, you know, growing concern over the poaching crisis in parts of Africa. The response obviously was, in places heavily militarized, anti-poaching operations, which brought military and security actors into environmental protection debates for perhaps the first time at a significant scale. And that obviously triggered a lot of debate over both the benefits that those kinds of actors could bring, but also the risks and challenges. And all of that discussion, of course, was very narrowly focused on wildlife crime. At the same time, I think there was this growing awareness of just the sheer amounts of money involved. And there were attempts, as I'm sure we all remember, sort of from mid-2010s to elevate wildlife crime on international agendas by using a terrorism financing narrative. And there were, you know, various claims that groups such as Al-Shabaab were substantially profiting from ivory. Those kind of narratives gained huge political traction, taken up by heads of state, senior policymakers, as a way to really demonstrate why wildlife crime mattered for international security. They were effective, very politically effective, attracted a lot of attention. But of course, the evidence proved more complex, and we at RUSI and others really thought it was important to sort of look at what is myth and what is reality here. And some of the claims were overstated, we found, but actually the broader conclusion was more important, which was that wildlife crime did have serious and diverse security implications, even without those quite sensationalized terrorism narratives. So, okay. Yeah, so to really show the full range of those implications, there were a lot of organizations, of course, that worked to drive an understanding of wildlife crime as a much more multidimensional security threat. I think collectively we've shown how the impacts of that span so many different areas of security, from human security to corruption, conflict, erosion of governance, organized crime. There was quite an irritating tendency for a while, I think, to argue that wildlife crime was linked to organised crime. And there were lots of organisations that have really worked hard to show that, this is organised crime. It's not linked to it. This is fundamentally a criminal market that poses just as much of a threat as others, such as drugs, firearms, and other markets. So, yeah, all of this, as I've said, was focused quite specifically on wildlife. I think there's been a more recent phase where institutions, organizations working in this field have been trying to show over a number of years that the security implications go way beyond wildlife to other forms of crimes, to other crimes that affect the environment, and that those crimes do remain under-recognized despite their very profound national security implications. I think illegal fishing is a really important example. This is still often discussed primarily as a fisheries management or regulatory compliance issue. But we, at RUSI and others have published extensive evidence for a number of years now showing the very serious implications for human security, the extensive convergence that exists with other crimes, threats to maritime security, linkages with piracy, other issues like that, food security risks, threats also to stability, where key actors are using fishing infrastructure in support of wider state geopolitical objectives. So a few years ago now at RUSI, we conducted quite a detailed global horizon scan of the links between illegal fishing and climate change. I don't think I have time now, but happy to talk about that in Q&A because I think it really illustrates some of the threats we're talking about. Illegal mining, another example. Across many regions, illegal mining is tied to territorial control by armed actors, corruption, very significant flows of illicit finance, environmental destruction, violent criminal economies, waste trafficking, another really good example that I think we don't talk about enough in terms of the security implications. Again, far too often treated as a separate or a regulatory issue and not investigated, not treated as serious crime. So I think, just those brief points just illustrate that the transition in our thinking to seeing crimes that affect the environment as serious national security threats is incomplete. The last stage of this diagram here, I don't think we're there yet in terms of a very common collective understanding of the major cascading security impacts associated with environmental crime. And Carol's made some of those points very well. The linkage between biodiversity loss, environmental crime, climate, I think there's been some great work that's been done by WWF and others to really illustrate the climate impacts of multiple forms of environmental crime. And that's really important to show how this feeds into those really, system level overarching national security scenarios that we need to be worried about. So, yeah, ultimately, we need to see crimes that affect the environment as threat multipliers. They exacerbate many of the existing threats, caused by climate change, biodiversity loss. All of those security threats that come with those issues are tied together and driven in many cases by crimes that affect the environment. We have to be considering environmental crime in those terms. We have to be including it in the climate security conversations we're having in a more significant way. So that's where I think we need to focus now. There's an urgent need for our security and wider policy architectures to adapt and accept and address those risks. Thanks.
Thank you, Cathy. And I think your presentation sort of reflects the same conversations that many state representatives have had in Vienna over the last few years, how the conversation has grown from, of course, considering the impact of wildlife trafficking to a growing number of crimes that affect the environment. And RUSI has certainly played a significant role in making that link to national security. And I'm hoping this conversation can contribute to that. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Simone Haysom, Director of Environmental Crime and Head of EcoSolve, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. Of course, GTalk is a well-known and appreciated partner in this forum, and I'm thrilled to have Simone as a part of our panel today. Thank you. Also, I am told that the clicker works, so there's some progress. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to put my timer on. Thank you so much, Alice, for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you also very much to the two previous speakers, Carol and Cathy. I think you guys set out such a great conceptual framework for this issue. I'm going to be doing something a bit different and speaking about some specific cases drawn from GTalk's work in different African regions. We have observatories across the continent, and we are also doing work on these issues at a global policy level. That's research that has gone deep into questions of the political economy of illicit flows, insurgent financing, state capture, and criminal governance. And across these studies, there are for me two structural features of environmental crime, particularly in the African context, where you have many countries being source countries, so having actual natural resources extracted within them. And I think they help to sort of consistently explain or frame the national security consequences, as well as I think they can help us understand why and where environmental crime could continue to shape insecurity across the continent. Those two features are that environmental resources require state management and regulation at every stage, making the state a specific high-value corruption target with consequences that go beyond enforcement. The second is that environmental crime is inherently territorial and and because resources are spatially fixed and frequently overlap with historically contested land, environmental crime can often activate and amplify pre-existing tensions. To understand the gatekeeping problem and why the state becomes and how the state becomes a corruption target, there are two cases from Southern Africa that I think are particularly illustrative. Firstly, that of the illegal abalone trade, which since the 1990s has been flourishing along the western Southern African coast, where wild abalone is harvested and shipped to Asia. It's been extremely organized since the 1990s, when local gangs involved in the drug trade in large urban areas were approached by an established lasting collaboration with Asian criminal networks. This led to what we've called the progressive gangsterization of the coastline, with often violent flare-ups in the struggle to control lucrative poaching grounds. And it also had a transformative impact on gangs themselves, because abalone basically provided a new revenue stream for buying drugs, weapons, etc., holding on to power, and proved to be quite a liquid asset, which is also very amplifying in a criminal economy. This is an illicit economy which has been a highly corrupting force. Instances of corruption in the abalone trade have ranged from quotidian bribes to low-level officials to serious allegations against senior officials. Corruption enables divers to access supposedly protected waters and know when patrols will or won't be there, for local middlemen to safely transport abalone to buyers. It allows evidence to go missing, bulk batches of confiscated abalone to be steered at discounted prices to people with ties to poaching syndicates. And the man on the screen is Ernie Lastig, who was a leader of the 28's gang based in the Western Cape and a major figure in the illegal abalone trade until his assassination in 2020. What emerged? So there was a lot of corruption, obviously, within the police and within other enforcement agencies, but a particularly destructive feedback loop between the department that regulated fisheries management and the solicit economy. So you had weaknesses in regulation and enforcement around it, which then allowed the illegal abalone trade to grow, which generated funds and incentives to corrupt more officials, which meant that the regulatory agencies became worse at management, and so the established trade flourished, and so on. And that was a major contributor to what was at one point being called regulatory collapse, failure to gather data on remaining abalone populations, vacant posts due to officials being removed for corruption, deterioration of monitoring and compliance services, failure to award long-term fishing rights, which then became a huge source of local grievance, etc. The second case, also from Southern Africa, is around the trade in rhino horn, which from around 2005, there's been a sort of renewed, sustained, and organized criminal demand for rhino horn, driven primarily by Asian markets, which placed extreme poaching pressure on wild rhino populations, which were concentrated in state-managed parks, but not exclusively. The trade is very structured, highly organized, trafficking syndicates coordinating with local poaching networks, whose crime bosses were often embedded in broader organized crime ecosystems. And there was a distinct sort of evolution of this illicit economy, particularly when enforcement became more effective, where organized crime groups began to engage in a much more deliberate, targeted, and effective campaign to recruit rangers as informants, so that they would know where patrols were going to be, where rhinos were, and when there would be opportunities when officials wouldn't be monitoring particular parts of the park. And that was largely possible because rangers don't all live in the park. Many live in towns outside it, where they were surveilled, targeted directly by organized crime groups, sometimes subtly, sometimes very directly. And this wasn't opportunistic or demand-driven. This was organized crime investing in state capture because the returns on corrupting a gatekeeper were enormous. Regarding the second claim, the territorial consequences problem. Sorry, if you can go to the next slide, please. It's clear from multiple cases that environmental crime drives social conflict or enables a legitimacy transfer to criminal or armed groups. In many regions of Africa, boundaries, including those of protected areas, were drawn through and around communities, encoding dispossession and exclusion. Natural resources are often just located where governance is particularly weak, where land rights are particularly contested. And even setting that history around, there are often just tens or hundreds of thousands of people living around the boundaries of national parks and engaging in livelihoods that are at odds with conservation objectives. This history matters because territorial grievance is often latent in places where before organized crime arrives. In the Congo Basin, we see frequently sort of social conflict arising when there are cases of logging concessions being illegally or inappropriately allocated, where there are local communities that depend on those forests for their livelihoods, for spiritual reasons, for agriculture. Communities often protest these concessions. Disputes have led to economic blockades of key transport infrastructure, destruction of property, clashes with security forces. There's also well-documented cases of armed groups taxing or protecting illegal logging or charcoal flows. That's been a major feature of the conflict landscape in Eastern DRC for a number of years. And lastly, we have also seen places where illegal logging, or at least the inappropriate allocation of concessions, has contributed to intercommunal tensions, with the most recent serious episode being in Chopo province in eastern DRC, where forest governance disputes became entangled with ethnic mobilization, rumors of land sales, militia activity, ultimately contributing to hundreds of people dead and a mass displacement of, I think, 90,000 people. Next slide, please. The other situation, which we've studied in quite a lot of detail, is in West Africa, into the so-called WAP complex that straddles Burkina Faso, Niger, and Benin, which provides sort of a flip side to this project, where communities are kept outside of conservation areas, and where since around 2021, armed groups have moved into them, controlling trafficking routes for a mix of commodities, including excisable goods, but also natural resources. And we've seen there in the response by states, which has been to sort of further limit communities' access to parks, often a legitimacy transfer to armed groups because of their ability to then give local communities access to protected areas for hunting, and artisanal gold extraction and other purposes. And while I think this case speaks less directly to transnational environmental commodity flows, it's very powerfully illustrative of how much pressure is coming to bear on protected areas, a pressure that's only going to increase. So across these 4 African regions, our research points to the same conclusion. Environmental crime has distinctive national security consequences because of these 2 features. It attacks the state in specific ways through the gatekeeping functions that make resource governance possible. And it also activates conflict in a specific geography, landscapes that are already sites of contested access, historical exclusion, and competing claims to legitimacy.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you for connecting the dots back to what I said in my introduction at the very beginning, the fact that protected areas, it matters how well protected they are. When we talk about remote areas, their management or lack thereof matters in terms of security as well, because as you mentioned, they do provide both the potential revenues as well as the logistical space and opportunity for organized crime to operate. We have about 15 minutes for questions, but before I open the floor, I had a few questions for the panels. And actually, I'd like to start with you, Simone, because you mentioned a number of crime types, and thank you for these fantastic case studies. But I wonder where you see this going and how do you see this evolving? We know, for example, that illegal mining, including gold mining, is increasingly a problem across many states, not only in Africa, but we have here many representatives from Latin America, and we know it's a serious concern for many of you as well. How do you see this evolving from a security perspective?
Thanks, Alice. I'm glad you brought up gold, actually, because it's probably the most classic example in the African context, particularly right now, of how environmental commodity flows are producing insecurity. I would say that across GTOC, we're extremely worried about the global gold trade and the different consequences it's having for a number of different criminal markets and in a number of regions. I expect that to remain as much of a problem as it is, as long as the gold price remains so high and the international response remains so uncoordinated and weak. It's an area where we don't have international treaties. There's a huge amount that can be done, not just in the African continent, but in other regions where gold is being processed and bought and ultimately shipped. Cautiously optimistic that conversations will build to a head and there'll be some action taken on that issue. I'd also flag, it's not so much on the radar, but we're seeing in Latin America a really concerning sort of criminal capture and fraud around voluntary carbon credit markets That's a market that's expanding, that is becoming more institutionalized. We hear claims we haven't been able to verify on the ground around displacement of communities by criminal actors within the Congo Basin as well, particularly in areas of the Congo Basin which have very little monitoring. So I would also flag that as being a particular trend that's quite concerning.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, rightly so, the lack of international legislation and definitions, the lack, as we've talked about throughout this week and in many occasions before, the lack of any international legally binding framework is indeed a problem that's being addressed through the leadership of many countries that are currently talking about developing a potential protocol under the UNTOC, and that is a conversation that will continue between now and UNTOC COP in October. Now, Carol, I would like to go back to you because I know the UK has given this a lot of thought, and again, I'm very grateful for your leadership, but I know that you've been working on establishing a nature security, research, and development program, and that caught my interest, and I just wanted to learn a little bit more about it. And has that open opportunities for interactions with other countries? Has that sparked the interest of other member states on this subject?
Thanks, Alice. Yes, well found out. Our team have been working on developing a 3-year nature security research and development program. It has actually gone out to tender. It is open to international partners, so we can share that link with people if anyone is interested or would like to share across networks. We see lots of opportunity in this space and the need to work collaboratively and to ensure that this is not treated in a fragmented way or a siloed way. All of these things have to come together, and it's about building that picture very much. And I see it as like dominoes, and people wait until it gets to their domino, right? And we can't do that. Like, we have to intervene earlier. So you have to understand how other people's dominoes can talk to yours. And that's the way I think of it. So we're very much focusing on anticipatory warning systems, early warnings, like kind of those sort of signals in this R&D work. It absolutely has opened up opportunities for us. By publishing the report, we wanted to do this. The UK is very keen to progress this with others and to learn from others, but also to share what we've learned with others as well, so that we can do this in a consistent way and we can do it in a way that makes a difference. We've already had some international partners reach out to us on this. I was invited out to Paris at the OECD in relation to directly linking the assessment to nature finance and illicit finance and things like that. So people are making those links, and we've had other countries who've translated this assessment already and have taken it away and looked at it as like a snapshot, like a scoping exercise of what that might look like across their own areas, and have reached out to have more policy-facing discussions with us on the back of that as well. So it's generated lots of positive interest. Tom and I had a great conversation with Brazilian colleagues this morning as well on that, and we absolutely see this being a significant part of all the international platforms across, especially across this year.
Thank you, Carol. And I see the chat is very active, so I will go to you, Cathy, for a rapid fire question. But then I'd love to ask our IT colleagues if they can read some of those questions, because I'd love to know if they're good questions. If they're bad questions, then no, of course. But if they are good questions, we would love to know what some of the colleagues are thinking. Cathy, this forum and many others would rather talk about pretty much anything other than illegal fishing. So of course, I have to ask, you mentioned illegal fishing through a national security, international security perspective. I would love to learn a little bit more about that and RUSI's research on that topic.
Thanks. Yeah, it's hard to be brief, but I think it's useful maybe very, very quickly to go over. We basically conducted a global horizon scan a few years ago. I know this exercise is being repeated by others on different subjects, which is great. But it was really, really illuminating, I would say, in terms of what actually came out of it, in terms of national security concerns. So I think it is worth mentioning. Really briefly, it involved a global call for participation, which was distributed very widely across 2,000 plus individual experts, 15 networks, 25 regional fishery management organizations. We received about 150, slightly more, very well-researched submissions on basically what experts all over the world in all different global oceans and seas, inland waters, were seeing in terms of how illegal fishing is likely to evolve and is already evolving in response to climate change. And yeah, worryingly, a lot of the findings and the observations that came in were very relevant to this discussion. Very briefly, so a lot of them revolved around shifting fish stocks and distributions. So as waters warm, there's obviously, this is not uniform across all oceans, but in general, there's going to be a movement, and there is already a movement of fish to cooler and deeper waters, and also towards the poles. And that shift in sort of, distributions really has quite significant implications in terms of food security, livelihoods, maritime safety, as the fishing profession has to go further to fish. This also obviously brings into play maritime boundaries, fish crossing exclusive economic zones, and the implications of that for, contestation and conflict at sea that we're already seeing in some locations, potential to fuel conflict over fishery resources. We're already seeing that in relation to certain jurisdictional boundaries and fisheries in some regions, and the finding was that is likely to increase. A brief word also about crime convergence. That was something that came out very strongly. Obviously, there is a lot of crossover between illegal fishing and many other forms of crime. So human trafficking, labor exploitation, drug trafficking, fishing infrastructure as well. The use of fishing infrastructure is very well known as an enabler of other crimes. So use of small fishing vessels to traffic drugs is on the rise. There's been a study that found that use of fishing vessels in drug transshipment operations has tripled in the last 8 years. And those shifting patterns of crime convergence do bring into play some quite different threats and threat profiles that we need to be looking at and that do need more study. So yeah, overall fishing fleets, not just as extractive platforms, but as logistical, geopolitical, and sometimes quite coercive infrastructure is something we need to be paying more attention to. This is only going to become more significant in the context of climate stress and growing competition over marine resources. So basically, the findings were that we're not adequately accounting for those security and geopolitical stakes that are woven into fishing activity. We're not looking enough at resilience among affected communities, and not only coastal communities, but all of us who are affected by this as a significant food source. And ultimately, we're just not treating high volume illegal fishing with the severity it deserves. So there you go. I'll leave it at that.
Louder for the people in the back. We are not treating illegal fishing with the seriousness and importance that it deserves. So I think it's a very important and relevant conversation, including relevant to many of the conversations that this forum has been having on crimes that affect the environment. So thank you, Cathy. I would love to see if there's any questions in the room. I know that there's a few comments in the chat. I'm being told that actually one of the main things that has come up is about the Nature Security Research and Development program. So what are the opportunities for those that are interested, Carol, to join that effort or participate in that effort?
I will share the link and we can drop it out to everybody. You can probably search it on gov.uk in the meantime if you want to get ahead of everybody. But it's out to tender. You have a look at the opportunities that are on there, and then please do share across your networks, put in. It's a huge opportunity for us to really embed this across everything, to make sure that nature security considerations really are a running vein throughout all of our work here, and it isn't just an add-on at the end of everything as we see at the moment. But we've made massive progress with thanks to the support from people who've seen the assessment. So yeah, I can share the assessment and the link to tender. Thanks to everyone for the interest.
Wonderful. So are there any questions in the room? I do. I see Sheldon Jordan. Thank you very much. Shel, do you want to approach one of the mics?
Thanks. I have about 1 million questions. Wonderful, really interesting. So I'll keep it very short. What do you see? A lot of the presentations and a lot of the examples referred to things that were happening on the high seas or in the global south. What do you see as the role of the global north in contributing to this, and how the global north can help contribute to solving the problems that's being generated? And I'm thinking in terms of markets and things like that. My own country, Canada, apart from the boreal forest, which you mentioned, is also one of the largest importers of wood, the third largest. And secondly, you have all been involved in your different roles in engaging. What has been working in terms of engaging? What has been generating support and engagement from governments and from other civil society on the environmental security nexus? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sheldon, we'll take another question because I know that there's one online. Maybe I'll give the floor to my colleagues in the back to say it out loud. Thank you.
Great. I'll read a question from online. This is coming from Iris Ho, asking whether speakers can talk briefly about live animal trafficking, and especially great apes, and how that intersects with the broader environmental crime and national security interests. For instance, the Wagner Group was rumored to be involved in illegal wildlife trafficking of gorillas in Central Africa. So if you have any comments on that particular crime type.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. So who would like to take the first question from Sheldon? What is the role of the global north, and what is the role of civil society in all of this?
I come in on the point on what's working with international partners from our perspective, if that's helpful. So I think for us, it's coming at this through the nature security lens and thinking about this across that whole spectrum. It's not thinking this is one size fits all. Like, that's why we're encouraging fellow governments to do their own nature security assessments, but that we would absolutely welcome dialogue with those partners as well. With thanks to Canada, when we were doing the assessment, we had great support from Canada on there before it was even published in terms of helping us with that. So all of the countries like really came together and helped us on that. I think it's about understanding what the interest is for certain countries, and then rather than just talking like giving the same message out to everybody wants a different message or a different approach. So some things that are concerns for one country aren't for another. We had a really productive US and UK Nature Policy Week in February in the US. We had very productive conversations looking at all of this through a risk and resilience landscape. But some of the approaches there in terms of the water security and things that we had like significant success with, and we've developed active collaboration on the back of that to work with people as well, work with US colleagues. Some of that wouldn't work with a different country. So for us, through the nature security side, it's not going into a room and thinking that we know what that partner is after, or that we hold the answers to what they're after. We don't. We need to knit all of this together. Still, it's a story that's being told still, the same as Cathy said. And yeah, I think it's just identifying what that hook is for certain countries and where the interest is, and where the UK can learn from other people and develop and strengthen our understanding, and also where we can share and help others. Hope that's helpful.
And I guess just a note from civil society and on civil society, what role can civil society play? Of course, there's many of us represented in this room, and there's many angles that we can tackle. But from the Wildlife Conservation Society perspective, it sort of goes back to what I said at the beginning. So from our own institutional approach, what role can we play, and do we play in supporting the management of protected areas, making sure that wild places are not only thriving places for biodiversity, but they're also places that remain safe for human activity and the rule of law. So I guess that's one angle. But I don't know if colleagues have something to add. Of course, the GI has been leading on so much research. I don't know if you want to add anything on that from a civil society perspective.
Sorry, on the live animal question.
You can I think the live animal question is going to be a difficult one, but
I've got a great answer actually.
Perfect. There you go. We have a volunteer.
I'm very glad someone wanted the live animal trade. We don't have hard data because it doesn't exist, but many people who monitor those markets very clearly think that the trade in live animals has grown hugely. And I think many people would also agree that sort of abuses and flagrant disregard of norms and laws around the transport of wild animals have become extremely flagrant, and there's a huge collapse of global norms around that, which is worrying. I don't know that we found a very direct national security implication for that beyond the very severe biodiversity implication for it. I think that there is another element to the trade in live wildlife, which I would go broader than sort of pets destined for private collections, but also in captive breeding and the sort of seeding of wild animals into that genetic stock. I think there is a huge risk of zoonotic spillover that still exists within the wildlife trade. I think that is by far the biggest security threat that one could imagine, another global pandemic. And I don't know why people continue to be so blasé about it.
Absolutely. And actually, that's one angle that we have not mentioned much so far, but the public health link to what zoonotic spillover can mean for not only countries and regions, but humanity, as 2020 has taught us all too well. And I guess this is completely removed from the live animal trade. But one other angle that we've not had the opportunity to get into today is, of course, when we talk about displacement, as Simone has mentioned earlier, there is a strong link to migration. So I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation on the national security impacts of crimes that affect the environment. I know that we have a few more questions online, but I'm mindful of the fact that we're at time, so we'll have to wrap it up. But I do hope that as this forum and many others going to the Crime Congress in September, going to UNTOC COP13 in October, we continue to not only keep environmental crime on the agenda, but also really meaningfully connect the links that go beyond environmental harm, beyond ecosystem degradation. Because as colleagues have mentioned actually earlier today, we talk about crimes that affect the environment, but that includes so much more than the environment, and includes so many more offenses than what we would normally include in the category. So there's really so much more work to do. I am personally excited, and I know as WCS we are excited to see where UNTOC COP13 will lead us. And yeah, we're grateful once again to the UK government and our partners for today's conversation, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. Once again, thank you to all of our online participants as well, and we look forward to seeing you soon.